Mr. Chairman, staff is ready to begin when you are.
Thank you very much, Teresa. I'd like to call to order and welcome everyone to the February 25th Public Planning Committee meeting. Teresa, are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, sir, we are.
Thank you. Would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Ms. Becker?
Here.
Mr. Brown? Mr. Brown, it looks like you're muted on your end. Okay, we'll give him a second and we'll move forward with Mr. Stanford.
Yes, I'm present.
Mr. Ames?
Yes, here.
And I do see Mr. Brown is on the line. We'll reach out to him to see if he has any technical difficulties we could work through.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Second.
Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. There's Alex. Alex, you're present. Alex, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Good.
Apologize.
We just voted to approve the agenda. Are you in favor of approving the agenda?
Absolutely.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the set of 2 minutes from prior meetings?
I would move to approve the minutes as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Teresa, better call the roll on that one.
Certainly. Ms. Becker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes, approve.
Mr. Stanford?
Approve.
Mr. Ames?
Yes, approved. Thank you. Teresa, do we have members of the public who would like to address the committee?
Yes, sir, we do. There are 2 members of the public on the line who wish to give comments on the trolley service update. And in addition to callers, we have public comments on agenda items that were submitted electronically via the Open Town Hall portal. Those comments were provided to the committee for review and made part of the official record.
And I would just note that several of the comments dealt with the idea of providing trolley service between Shelter Cove and Folly Field to extend the trolley service into the Folly Field area. And I appreciate the citizens who provided that feedback. Thank you. Go ahead.
That's all from me, Mr. Chairman.
Well, do you have the public to speak at this time?
They're not on the call right now, but they did want to speak on the trolley update. So we had them marked for that item.
Oh, I understand. For some reason you were muted and I didn't hear that. Okay. Unfinished business parking plan. This is a big item for us. Is there a staff presentation on this item? Hello,
Hi, Jennifer Ray for the record, and not so much a presentation, but just really wanted to introduce this item. We asked or are following your request to put this on based on the discussion at your workshop, and brought this so that you could provide some direction to staff on the immediate action items that were in the report that you adopted in November. So those immediate action items included establishing the Parking Enterprise Fund, modifying Title 12 of the Municipal Code, looking at the parking fine ordinance, the parking enforcement ordinance, vehicle immobilization policy, and the residential parking district policy. So that was just staff's recommendation that you provide any direction on those immediate action items. And I'll just be here to listen and answer any questions if you have any.
I see. The word immediate was used in the report. Is that not the case?
Correct. They used immediate, short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And immediate, they defined as 3 to 6 months.
Thank you. Is there any expectation on the part of staff that any of these immediate steps could be implemented for this year?
I believe there is, and Josh, you can jump in if you might have some more info than I do, but I believe we could begin the work on modifying the Title 12 of the Municipal Code and move forward in preparing an RFP for a third-party vendor to do the operations, maintenance, and enforcement part of it, and we could begin that work within the near term, the immediate term.
Yeah, let me re-ask the question. Is there anything that, if we took immediate action, would be implemented and have on parking this year? My impression is no, but I'm trying to figure out.
I understand your question. Yes, you're correct. Nothing would change what we would be able to do for this season, but there is work that we could get started that would end up impacting next year's season.
Okay, so this committee is getting its first shot at discussing these immediate action items. That's essentially what we're doing today.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Becker, do you have questions or thoughts?
Both, probably. First, I'd like to say it's great to see both Mark and Josh on the screen joining this meeting. And I say that because I'm happy to have their ears and their involvement. In particular, I'm interested in hearing what Mark has to say as he's coming on new. So mostly, I think we should be in a discussion mode with regards to this so that we can bring him in and listen to his perspective as well. From my perspective, I'll just take them in order of bullet points, right? Establish a parking enterprise fund. Well, that seems reasonable. And further seems reasonable to me as the document had pointed out, there should be a significant revenue stream that comes from implementing a parking fee. And with that, it would be my hope that all costs associated with parking and perhaps extension to beach maintenance, since that's become quite an issue, would come from that, as well as the possibility of a waiver, I guess, or a non-fee parking sticker for island residents who currently have to pay to get a sticker to use the beach parking. So I think those would be positive things to come out of that fund. Secondly, to modify the Title 12 of the Municipal Code. As I understand that, and I think probably Josh could help me better understand it, that involves creating additional parking zones, and it was on the island with regard to beach and visitors. It was my understanding from the beginning of this that there would be no increase in the amount of available parking. We wouldn't create new parking lots or parking areas for folks to use. And so that one I'm a bit bothered by, because I was comfortable with that, that we wouldn't be doing that. So did I get that wrong, Josh, or am I
You're correct. With what was outlined in the report, there's not a direct investment by the town to create more inventory of parking spaces. However, we've actually been able to identify the opportunity to create more spaces through potential joint partnerships with some of the churches, particularly those that are along Pope Avenue. And so there's an opportunity to create more capacity from a parking standpoint, at least in certain areas, without actually making an investment in building or creating more parking spots.
Okay, so those would, I assume, since you're mentioning churches and businesses that might on the weekends not have, and I assume the weekends not have the need for their own parking spots, that we could utilize that space. Is that correct?
That's correct. They would be able to partner with our third-party management firm or either do it independently themselves, but be able to rent those spaces out to beachgoers and others who are looking for a parking spot in those areas.
Okay, perfect. And then a parking fine ordinance, and that would be to create and manage a civil citation program versus a criminal program, and increase the fines to $50. With the how would that actually work? Just
Sure. So there's several different organizations that are already set up and operating like this, but it's essentially what you see in various municipalities, that you have somebody who goes around checking parking meters or checking the kiosks. If you are in a spot where you're required to pay to park and you are beyond your paid time, or you have not paid, then you will receive an administrative citation. And what that means is you will have to pay a monetary penalty for violating the town's ordinance.
What's the follow-up on that? How does that go forward? Yeah.
Sure. So ultimately, that's where contracting with a third-party agency comes in. A lot of times, the primary means of enforcement are continuing to add additional penalties for failure to pay the fine in a timely manner. And ultimately, what ends up happening in a lot of places is if you have fines that are outstanding that have not been paid, and the enforcement arm is patrolling and they discover somebody who has outstanding citations that have not been paid, their vehicle is subject to being booted or towed in order to cause them to have to pay those outstanding fines.
Okay. So at one point, I think there was discussion that sometimes those fines too could make their way to the register car's DMV, and that when they went to re-register a car, et cetera, there would be that would be another means of collection. Is that part of what this is about as well?
It might be. Those rules really vary from state to state about what kind of access you have. And so that's where I would default to our third-party administration firm to leave the collection and enforcement up to them in terms of what they're legally able to do.
And under the assumption that all of this is coming from the revenue from the parking fees, is it assumed that there's a substantial enough amount of money in there that would be able to support this third party to manage all that?
Yep. The business model that was included as part of the master plan development basically takes into account the overhead that would be necessary to hire personnel, provide equipment, provide technology that's necessary to create and enforce this program. And then beyond that, it projected a net revenue stream to the town, I believe a little in excess of $3 million, if I recall correctly, which is certainly not an insignificant amount.
Right. Okay. I'm just making sure that everyone's aware of I recall reading the report, and it was fairly detailed. The vehicle immobilization policy seems a little bit drastic and draconian to me. So I hope that we wouldn't get that far. So if I had to pick where this is, beginning to get off the rails in terms of being a hospitable island, that might be the one that crosses the line for me at this point. Mm-hmm. So, and then the residential parking district policy, that was where within each neighborhood there could be. So I'll let you describe it if you have a second to do that.
Sure. Well, what was envisioned is that certain neighborhoods would allowed to come to the town to work with us as a partner to establish parking rules and regulations that are tailored to those particular communities. I would tell you that based upon our interactions with many communities thus far, there doesn't appear to be a significant demand to do that. So even though our consultant identified this as an immediate activity, if I had to tell you which one is not necessarily on that list, that would be this one. Now, I would point to what it says in there, which is probably what we're going to see more of, which is a no parking district. rather than a parking district. And I think with regards to that, we would do the same thing, but because the enforcement of those parking districts would ultimately be the responsibility of the third-party agency, I would want to make sure that we have them on board before we start creating those districts so that they understand what it is that they're being asked to enforce.
Right, and so my comment on that last piece is exactly what you pointed out. I would imagine far more neighborhoods being interested in being a no parking district than embracing the idea of becoming a parking district. So those caveats with regard to the report are the things that stick out in my mind. I do think that it is appropriate at this time to look to create a parking fee for the island. But I would hope, again, I'm just going to reiterate because it is important to me, and I think most island residents, that any revenue ought to be shared across the tax base here and relieved of their burden of having to purchase a parking pass. So with that, I will be quiet for a while and listen to others. Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy. Alex?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around the whole idea. I can appreciate paid parking giving the town an additional source of revenue. But the end goal besides that is what I'm having trouble wrapping my head around. And I'll go back to the Circle to Circle committee, where as we started to make the capital investments in the Coligny district, one ideal was that this would become a more walkable and bicycle type area. So to me, there should be some intent to lessen the amount of vehicles in that area somehow. And I'm not 100% positive at this point that having paid parking is going to accomplish that for us. And I will try my best to make this relevant to the area. We currently have free parking in Coligny as far as the town-owned property is concerned. And as many of you know, I've got a business in Coligny Plaza. And in the heat of the summer, visitors will park right in front of my store, take out their beach chairs and head straight to the beach. And we'll be there for hours. And Coligny Plaza does all that they can to secure the area through enforcement and trying to monitor that, but it's overwhelming. All right, so if we're going to be charging parking in a lot that is further away from the beach than you already have free parking, I just I'm thinking that we're going to enhance the problem that we currently have. So I need to get some more confidence in the fact that we're going to, at some point, lessen the amount of vehicles in the area through some other means of transportation. I think is critical to that area and how it functions. And just to pour more on top of it, we've got a beautiful park there now in Celebration Park that is going to attract not only visitors, but even more events. So all of that to me needs to be calculated into our direction. I don't have a complete suggestion at the moment. I apologize for that. But I'm just offering up a bit of long-term thinking here in terms of the way that the area operates currently and the potential with more capacity with a new attraction. Those are my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alex. Glenn?
Thank you. First comment on the items that were put down as immediate ideas. I think the term immediate may not be the right term. I think it would be the first things that we would deal with. In terms of dealing with those individual points, I would need input from the staff on the pluses and minuses of the various factors, and then we can debate that in this committee, in other committees, and with the full council in order to come to implementation. All that being said, I certainly regret that we're not going to be able to do much of anything about the parking issue, primarily in the Coligny area this summer, but that's where we are. And so we need to make it certainly a priority to have a program in effect, however it evolves, for the next warm weather season. Then getting to the broader picture about, as Alex brings up, the desirability of having access to Coligny and Celebration Park, and the beach, obviously, having that access more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. I agree that that is a worthy goal, but I don't know how realistic it is. There was an effort in the last year or so from the bicycle community to come along and try to add bicycle lanes paralleling some of the roads down there. And that was shot down. And if I recall, it was shot down by SCDOT. That's unfortunate. And so I think the idea of adding bicycle-friendly lanes would be good. I don't think it's realistic to expect people to park some distance away and to walk all the way to the beach or all the way to Celebration Park. Now, in terms of paid parking, to me, the idea, there are two prime motivations in paid parking. One is to be able to achieve some controls over who is using those parking lots and their willingness to make a contribution to pay for the benefits they're enjoying. And secondly, it is to achieve a revenue source in order to fund the program. And if we can believe what the parking study said, and it makes a compelling argument, that it would generate not only sufficient money to pay for the program, but also excess funds that could be reinvested in the community in various areas. Unfortunately, last year was a very difficult year in terms of measuring trolley service. We can remember that we decided to underwrite the trolley service and to make it free for use with the hope that, as has happened in other communities, that would result in an enormous increase in usage. Well, no one anticipated the COVID pandemic, and the result of the pandemic was that the trolley system wasn't used. I don't think that that is terminal for the trolley system at all. I think that is a side effect, negative effect of the pandemic, which please let me know is going away, beginning to go away at this time. So I see having paid parking as a necessary tool. I think it was useful to have the various categories of decision-making factors for us to have, but I don't think it was immediate in the sense that we needed to do it right now. I think we need to come up with an orderly program about presentation of these factors and adoption of necessary decisions or ordinances or regulations, whatever it is we need to do in order to put these things into place. The parking issue can get really complicated when we're dealing with parking for residents versus parking for visitors. We will require a major education initiative to educate the non-resident public about the parking and how it works so that we don't have a small revolution down there when we begin to implement that program, hopefully in the spring of next year, about 12 months from now. So we all know 12 months go by very quickly. I think it's useful to have this early on decision today, but I don't feel compelled to make any decisions today. Thank you, David.
Thank you. All right, my thoughts. We wouldn't have a parking problem if we didn't have a beach. I think those two things have to be considered together. So I again encourage staff to think about a parking strategy as a beach management experience strategy. Because if there is surplus in the revenues from parking, then I think it's absolutely essential that those revenues drive back into the experience that people have when they're on the beach. Is it well maintained? Is it clean? Does it have nice signage? Even the turtle issue, Shore Beach Services, it's a funding source for them perhaps. So I really think we should be thinking about this more broadly. And unless persuaded otherwise, I think it's a beach management plan that guarantees the highest level of satisfaction and enjoyment for those people who come to the beach. Now, what does that mean? It means that we are a hospitable island and that we have to anticipate that there are going to be more people wanting to get to the beach than we have parking spaces. So how do we tell people before they get in their car that it's going to be a waste of their time to try to drive from Pooler to Hilton Head? And what do we do about the residents who work on Hilton Head but live in Bluffton? So I'm very interested in staff's thoughts about how we begin to create an understanding beyond our own borders so that we don't just simply make absolute angry enemies of people who want to get to a state asset. And so I think that's an issue. The question, the sort of fundamental question in my mind, Jennifer, is it's a resource that's owned by all. Does the town have ways of controlling the number of people that want to get and are willing to go through what's necessary to get to the beach? And what's the most sensible and hospitable way of doing that? So I'm very much tuned into let's not make enemies if we don't have to. And I think that's a big issue. So it's the nexus between the beach experience and the parking revenues, and how do we leverage that so that it works to not only our benefit as residents, but we don't create enemies elsewhere. All right.
David, I've got another comment on that when you're finished.
Well, go ahead, interrupt me.
Well, I did. I was going to say that I agree with your notion of a beach management plan, but we've got to overlay the fact that we have that huge, wonderful park down there, which is going to be a huge draw, and it's not necessarily a draw to the beach at all. So it is more of a management of that entire zone down there rather than just to the beach, I think.
I think that's worth exploring. My intuition tells me that the person driving from Pooler to go to the park might be 1 in 10 at the most, and 9 people coming from Pooler or Bluffton or Hardyville or wherever. I'm just picking on Pooler. I think most people are going to be getting in their car in the summertime and putting a blanket in the trunk and going to the beach. So, but again, that's something I would ask staff to consider. You know, is there a way of tying all of these things together So it is the experience that we're focused on rather than just a parking restriction and revenues. So,
David, if I could speak to that just real quickly. In the report itself, there's a couple of things. Now, these are not a part of the immediate items, but they are part of what these future actions would call for as we move forward with the development of this program. There's an extensive communications plan with the community about what this means, how it impacts them, how they should use it. And then there's also something called dynamic wayfinding. And a lot of what I think you're talking about is the ability for us to communicate on a real-time basis with people about the status of various parking lots, how many people are there, how many spaces are available, so that if you're trying to sit in your driveway making the decision about where you're going to go and where you're going to do, you can pull it up online, you can go onto the app on your phone and be able to understand what the situation is before you ever start driving in any particular direction. And so that is certainly a part of what is contemplated for this. But in order to carry that out, there's some infrastructure, some technology, some other things that need to take place, but it is absolutely something that can be part of the plan that we move forward.
but we're being asked to consider establishing a parking enterprise fund. My first point is that maybe we ought to define what that entails and so on. And then secondly, I'm cautioning us to have our act together and be able to communicate it so that we have an understanding in the region where we're going with this.
So, can I just jump in on that small discussion? Because another point that was also in the report that, and bringing up that communication piece with folks coming onto the island, and as Josh correctly described, trying to determine where they're going on the island, if they're in fact truly just heading to the beach, or whether or not which one they want to choose. I am seriously concerned about any of these suggestions in the report that would include wayfinding along 278, illuminated fluorescent lights indicating where folks can go is, in my mind, antithesis to what the folks who live on Hilton Head Island as residents want to see. And I would suggest, as we move along in those communication type discussions, that wouldn't be, if I had my druthers, taken off the table, period. But certainly looked at extremely closely how it impacts our brand.
Well, we have the ability to control this, and whether we do it at all, and if we do it, we certainly put it through our design review board. So that anything that would be done would be in compliance with our design guidelines. But you're right, you all will control this as it moves forward, and you will pick the elements that you want to keep. You'll discard those that you don't, and ultimately we'll wind up with something. But where we are today is just beginning those initial conversations. And so what I see coming out of today's meeting is an instruction to staff that as far as a number of these kind of first action items go, we can begin drafting draft documents to basically then bring back to you to continue the conversation. And Glenn, to your point, knowing the pluses and minuses of each of those, as we work through those draft documents, we'll have an opportunity to talk about them in detail and what those things mean. And so this is going to be an incremental process that we're going to build up to ultimately having a full-blown parking program. Okay,
I haven't finished my comments, and I'll be quick. I'd like to re-emphasize, in my opinion, that the earlier we talk to our regional partners, the earlier we talk to North Forest Beach residents, the earlier we talk to the merchants in Coligny Circle, the better off we'll be. I just think that if we make a mistake early, it's going to be hard for us to retrieve that step. I don't want to get off on this, Josh, but at some point I'd like to ask the question. We had to go the criminal route with turtles, and this is the opportunity to go to a civil route with a parking, but you and I can talk about that later.
Yes, sir.
I'd make the comment that in talking with Shore Beach Services about something else, they're really wondering how they're going to be able to sustain their housing for their employees. And every time we create another apparatus that requires employees, we are just aggravating that situation that we need to solve. The towing that we talked about. This is another, it's like putting sand in between brake pads. It just doesn't feel good, and yet we have to have some kind of enforcement. And the problem that I think when we talked about this a year or so ago, one of the things that really irks some people was that when their car was towed, it was towed off island, and it was really harassment and an effort to find the place, get it back, and so on and so forth. If we're going to have a towing and immobilization plan, I think we should construct it in a way that we acknowledge that we are punishing the person, but we're not destroying their day or their week. I just think it's important for us to think through how do we do it the Hilton Head way that allows people to say, oh yeah, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have done that, yeah, I have to pay a fine, but it just doesn't make them angry, ideally. On the residential parking districts, I think really what those are going to come down to is no parking districts. And then you have signage and all sorts of issues. So that gets complicated. But boy, knowing the people in North Forest Beach, they've got a challenge there. So I think that's a hot item. I've hit communication, and I've also touched on the practical transportation. Glenn made this point. I think it's a good one. We can't load up every car that wants to go to the beach in Coligny Circle. We've got to find some practical way of moving people. So, Jennifer, those are my thoughts. My suggestion is that with these thoughts, you and staff and the town manager begin to pull together what you think might be a prudent way to sequence this in order to tie down the loose ends, and then come back to public planning perhaps in a month or what's practical, and make a presentation of your recommendations. Does that sound like a good plan for you?
Yes, sir. That sounds like a good plan.
Okay. Are there other comments?
Thank you for your input.
Okay. Mark, would you like to add anything?
Yes, sir. There's not much I can add aside from Josh's good explanation and Jennifer's explanation. All great questions. I started to take a look at the parking study yesterday and a few weeks earlier. It allows for some facility investment with a user fee return and free resident parking. I hear your point. Careful execution is needed. Ms. Becker, the careful, gentle wayfinding elements, I understand what you're asking for. But I do think that, of course, it's all about the details and how you implement it. I do look forward to working with Josh and Jennifer and staff and bringing back a plan. It sounds like the direction from all of you is, for the most part, move forward, but move forward carefully and start laying out how we get there. Don't just run down the street hurrying up to finish this assignment. Councilman Brown, you raised some questions that I would like to dive into a little more and truly understand where you're coming from in the sense of what this means. For me, the way I look at this is providing free resident parking. It allows for some partnerships with some surrounding businesses and community groups, churches, whatnot. There's 11 parking lots, as I see it. There's 11 spaces that would allow for an additional source of revenue to spruce up, beautify, and better program those spaces. How we get there, I haven't really dove into the numbers. I haven't taken a look at the revenue projections. I haven't looked at the input of those revenue projections, and I intend to truly understand if in fact it's going to net what it says it's going to net. It would save some time and energy and costs internally to do away with the beach parking passes as we administrate those internally. It would allow our staff to focus elsewhere. So there's cost savings and time savings. So I'm going to look at this from all angles. I took some good notes on your questions, and I know I can work with Josh to bring this back. We're going to need more than 30 days to put this together. So knowing that I'm starting to dive into the budget, I'm going to try to take a look at what I think the best question was, what can we get done this fiscal year? And I heard nothing. And so if that allows us 2 months or 3 months, 60 days or 90 days to truly do this right and have a really good game plan, that will help us a lot as a staff.
I appreciate that, but to the degree that you can bring preliminary thoughts to the committee, sort of an interim report if you're on a 3-month basis, just seek our input as early as possible.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Can I just be real clear on something that's important as those thoughts are all being carefully put together? I just want to make sure that in the end, we have a program that we've planned out that we can fairly confidently say will produce the revenue. Mark picked up on this, and it's important that it will produce the revenues that are projected, and that we don't ever get into the position where it's a cost burden for the town to have the program. So that to make sure that we don't over plan and implement pieces of this that would at some point take us out of the area of it being minimally a neutral position, but hopefully with a little bit of excess to be able to help, as you said, with the beaches and the costs associated with making sure they're maintained properly, etc. Also, in that same vein, making sure that we don't over-program so far away from the beach that people do make a concerted effort to find ways to park in places that we do not want them parking. And I think that goes to the businesses at Coligny's concerns, obviously North Florida Beach, and those residents' concerns. The further away we push it and say, oh, well, there's a trolley for you to hop on. In my experience as being a day tripper while my children were growing up, the closer you can get to the beach with all your stuff and dropping off kids, etc., the more positive experience it is. And when you're too far away, it's miserable for everyone. So I just wanted to throw that out there in the thinking process to keep that in mind.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, okay, we have taken care of the parking master plan. And now review and recommendations of family compound, family subdivision, LMO amendments. Is there a staff presentation?
Yes, there is.
Good. Thank you, Cherise.
Can you hear me? Yes, there is.
Cherise, I think we lost you.
So I'll jump in,
Good.
and Sharice can jump in if she can get back going. I don't have the benefit of her PowerPoint, but I'll bring you up to speed. So staff recommends that you review the land management ordinance for the historic neighborhood preservation overlay, the amendments related to family compound and family subdivision, and forward them on to approval by town council. So when we met with you all in January, you asked us to consider narrowing the target area to look at some defined geographic boundary, to research the definition of ownership, to do some outreach, and then to also look at the noxious disturbances. And what we've brought forward to you today are a set of LMO amendments that focus specifically on family compound and family subdivision, including the definition of family that we had before, as well as the requirement that you own property back to 1956, have a clear path of ownership. So that will help narrow the field a little bit more. Sharice, are you back live? I feel bad for her because she put together a whole presentation for you, to work through the things that you asked us to do. There was a document in your report that outlined the setbacks, changes to setbacks and buffers and access that would all be specific to family compound or family subdivision, as well as the provision to move these applications to the front of the line when they come in, compared to any other permit that came in. Sharice has had an opportunity to meet with some individuals in our community. She also has an open town hall running to get input from the community, and we are hearing that there are people in the community that would take advantage of this if it were in place right now as proposed. There are obviously things that people would like to see maybe in a later phase, but for now, this is a good start. We had the opportunity to meet with the task force a few weeks ago, and they were a little disappointed that we weren't moving forward with everything, because they, put in a lot of effort and feel strongly that some of the proposed changes that they proposed and that Planning Commission supported were positive. But based on your direction, we have pared back and are proposing moving forward just the family compound and family subdivision at this time. So I'll try to answer any questions that you have, and if Sharice, if she can come on, or I know Terry is on the call too. She's been part of the team that has been working on this as well and can help answer any questions y'all might have.
Alex, you have comments, questions?
Yeah, just a few. I guess the first one, the definition of ownership. I know there was some question about that at the last meeting. From a legal standpoint, have we gotten, I guess, a confirmation that?
Alex, I have spoken to the town attorney, and I think we are headed in a good direction, but I can't say that we have confirmation.
Okay, I would just ask that that piece is buttoned up as we move forward to full town council. I would hate to see this have to turn around at that point. Okay, and I think that's probably one of the only items with this particular set of amendments as far as the compound and subdivision is concerned. And I appreciate the fact that staff has spent some time with some families, and appreciate the comments that this will indeed help some of those that it was intended to help. All right, so that makes me feel better, and absolutely makes the community feel more comfortable with moving this forward. I guess I wanted to make one suggestion, because I'm under the assumption that we're going to try to bring forth the rest of the items that were incorporated, well, the package that was passed up from task force to planning commission, right? So now that we've taken this step to narrow the area, so to speak, with the ownership definition, I know the density conversation was a difficult one. There was concerns about overlapping the increased density with the affordable housing bonus density. There was some concerns about areas that are already developed and, a new density being applied to those. But since we are more so looking at that ownership definition now, I'd like staff to really dive into that. And I'm going to try to articulate this. And if I get lost along the way in my gullah, I'm going to ask that my best translator help me. That would be Councilman Ames. Okay. So when you date back to RUDAT and Ward 1 Master Plan, the whole reason for not increasing density in the RM4 district was because of lack of sewer, and you needed to have X amount of property in order to handle a septic system. So as you go through those documents, it will continuously say that once sewer is provided, or you have the ability to accumulate 3 to 5 acres, then you could experience increased density. Okay, so with that as a baseline, I just ask staff to really look at the number of properties that we're currently talking about that have that 1956 ownership, and see what the density increase will do. Again, based on that baseline that I'm talking about, with the sewer now being available and the potential of parcels being put together to 3 to 5 acres to get to the increased density. I'm not sure if planners are following what I'm saying.
No, you're doing well.
Okay, you got me? Okay.
Anything else, Alex?
That's it, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Glenn, thoughts?
Thank you. This is one of the types of issues where I think the concepts have a lot of appeal, but the nuts and bolts will often get in the way. And the first thing that I'm concerned about is how we go about determining, quote, ownership as of 1956. I'm sure that a fair amount of these properties in 1956 were heirs' properties, so we wouldn't have deed records there. Would we be relying on affidavits? Would we be relying on photographs, surveys? How do we go about determining ownership? And then this is akin to what Alex was just talking about, is what does ownership mean? And I get hung up in that because I used to be a lawyer about what ownership means. But so while the concept of allowing these for those historic families has a lot of appeal to all of us, I want to make sure that we've got good, viable tools so that the program is administered fairly. It's my understanding that there is a similar program in Beaufort County, and I would be very interested in how they go about establishing the ownership as of a certain date. I think in their case it was 1950, but how they go about doing it, because I would shamelessly copy some of those ideas if they made sense. And then I get confused about this and historic overlay district. Would these family subdivisions be limited to the areas that would be in the historic family or historic neighborhood overlay? I think the answer is no. I think they're different things, but I'm unclear about that. And so I would like some clarity. So I like the concepts. I just want to make sure that we're not just creating a headache and something that is ripe for discontent, disfavor, and litigation in the future. Thank you.
All right, Jennifer, can you address Glenn's last question about the overlay?
I can, or Sharice, if you want to jump in.
Is she available?
Yes, I'm here. I apologize. I was having technical difficulties earlier. Yes, Beaufort County does have a 50-year restriction on the people who could take advantage of their version of a family compound. And those are good questions to establish ownership. It would take some researching of those individual properties to make sure that they are adhering to the 1956 rule. If I can have the last question again, I was just sitting down getting situated.
Glenn?
I'm trying to remember what I said now.
That was the overlay. The difference.
Oh,
Yes,
I got it now.
yes.
Overlay versus family compound and family
Yes.
subdivision. Yes, the family compound and family subdivision would still be within the named historic areas, but the 1956 rule and the definition of family are ways to narrow those the people who can take advantage of it. Take advantage of those different applications. So it would still be in the historic areas. And right now, what we're asking is to move first forward the family compound and family subdivision, and then do the revisions on the rest of the proposed overlay.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Tammy?
So thank you, because that was a question that I had as well with regard to the particular area that we were referring to with this. And because there was confusion in my mind, I just want to make sure there's clarity on a couple of other things. Part of what Jennifer spoke about initially was noxious noises, I guess, smells, etc. And I'm not sure, reading this, if I see where that place is in this particular discussion. And so did I miss something, or can you point me in the right direction with that?
Yes, ma'am. When PPC last met, over the last couple of meetings, staff was asked to see what noxious noises or disturbances that people can tolerate. It's not in your packet, but what we did was put together a survey on Open Town Hall to see what disturbances people can live with, because when you're living in certain areas of the historic overlay district, people are using their land as they've always used it. So what we did was put together a survey. The noises were manure, compound odor, traffic noise, high traffic volume, noises from livestock, smells from livestock, patrons, and industrial sources, and garage sounds. So we asked about the least tolerable noxious disturbances and the most tolerable noxious disturbances. And we've had 8 people as of this morning do the survey, and most of the people were willing to answer what disturbed them more, but the least tolerable, the one that came up was patrons. But for high traffic volume, for industrial sources, for garage sounds, for traffic noise, those were the ones so far that people thought were the least tolerable. So now it's not the, yes, ma'am.
But to answer Ms. Becker's question, you didn't miss it. I hadn't gone into the detail about what, like Cherie said, what we had found out, but there's nothing in the amendments that we brought forward for you to look at today that addresses that. That I think is going to take more conversation when we close the survey, come back to PPC, go through the details and figure out what you might want to amend the LMO to include, and then also that broader communication to make sure everyone understands what we're talking about. But this is not, it's not part of what we're asking you to take action on today.
All right, so thank you for clarifying that, because I was trying really hard. I was listening, but in reading, and I wasn't putting it together. So some of that is the discussion with regard to home businesses. And I realize it's not for today, but I just want to make sure. Are those surveys being conducted assuming that there would be a home business allowed in these areas?
This is in preparation of revisiting the home occupation portion of the overlay district. When it was at the task force level, it was the agreement that that would be put to the side for now and revisited later.
Okay. Obviously an important conversation, as it changes the dynamic for those who have lived in their homes and changing their neighborhoods. And so I think that as those surveys come back, since we're talking about them, you're getting some responses, and that may be some responses from those who live in the houses now, but generally not likely, or maybe, but need to consider whether or not those responses would reflect future buyers of those properties and what it would do to the current and future pricing, property values, and the fair and equitableness to all in the community with regard to changing so dramatically the uses in that way. But moving on from that, though that helped to answer some of my questions. The other one that I noticed in there is that the buffer requirements go from the known buffer requirements that exist in the LMO to zero. I don't see anything I see the current, and then I see the change, and it's a blank space. Does that mean that all buffer requirements have been done away with?
No.
In terms of plantings, etc.?
No, ma'am. It's the minimum planting requirements for the minor arterial, all other streets, the access easement, and adjacent use. If you are adjacent to a single-family home, there is not a buffer requirement, but for all other uses, there are, but it's the minimum requirement. And in terms of how wide the buffer is, you can choose, for instance, with the minor arterial, you can choose between the 25-foot width and the 15-foot width, but you're not required to put the maximum buffer in. It's just the minimum.
Oh, so when it says minimum planting requirements and nothing is below it, really what it is saying is that the requirement is minimally the minimal amount of plantings. Okay.
Yes, that would be in the middle.
So if you did 15 foot, if you did 15 foot, instead of doing the max, you could do 15 foot width with the minimum planting. So it's giving you that benefit of less cost, less hardship to put in that landscaping, but still providing for some landscaping and some buffer, as we know are important in all areas of the community.
Absolutely. And so I think that just reverts back to what I was saying with regard to how this new standard for a certain property impacts everyone, since it lessens the purpose of a buffer, right? To separate different types of uses and provide quality of life for those in adjacent properties and neighborhoods. So I think that's something that it needs to be carefully considered as we try to provide relief, perhaps for one we take away from others. And I'm concerned about all of that and how it gets put into place, especially as if down the road we're talking about revisiting home occupations and we've established a minimum buffer, those noxious noises and sound, etc., that we're surveying become more dramatic, perhaps, more important, more problematic. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Can I, before you go ahead, Mr. Ames, the home occupation is the word that we used when we were going through with the task force. And in hindsight, that may not really be what we're talking about. That was the best place that it seemed to fit. But I think Mr. Brown has described it well about being the land sustaining the owner in perpetuity and how you are able to use your land. And occupation may not be the right word. I understand where you're coming, Ms. Becker, but maybe when we revisit it, when we get more information and come back to you, we might want to look at how we reframe that it's not so much opening a bunch more businesses within a residential area, but allowing members of the community to be able to use the land the way historically their families had and the way the land was able to sustain in perpetuity.
So that is a really good, important point. Is there definition? Is there something that surrounds that to better understand what that is? Because is that what would be something that has developed, someone who owns the property who wants to do a current occupation, or is that from the 1950s, or where does that sit? Because I think that's a critical piece of understanding what that really means. So anyway, that really does need far more discussion. Thank you.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Thank you. I'm not sure I know what we're being asked to do here. I see that staff has put together a lot of good concepts. I don't see those concepts being rejected here, but I see a lot of important questions surrounding those concepts. So what are we being asked to do here, David?
Let me see if I can state what it's my understanding. We are looking at a family compound and a family subdivision dealing with residential use at this time. And the parameters within those two classifications have some flexibility that other areas of the community don't have. So I think we're not talking about uses today. We're not talking about noxious impacts. We're talking about a LMO change that deals with two new classifications. I would anticipate that as we begin to look into uses, these parameters might have to be modified under certain circumstances. I don't know that for fact, but I could anticipate that. So I think what we're being asked, Glenn, is to approve this language to move it forward. I have a couple of questions. I have a single question, actually. Well, actually, it is two. I don't understand what minimum planting requirements means, and then I also would like to understand what adjacent use is. So I don't know, Jennifer or Charisse. Are there minimum planting requirements stated somewhere?
Yes, it's in the LMO. We're working on putting the screen up right now, but for a minor arterial, your minimum planting requirements are 3 overstory trees every 100 linear feet, 6 understory trees every 100 linear feet, and 10 evergreen shrubs every 100 linear feet. So those are your minimum planting requirements, and you can have either a 25-foot width or 15-foot width.
That's very helpful. What is adjacent use?
Adjacent use is next to, so if you are a residential that's next to an industrial, depending on whether or not, depending, I believe it's a 30-foot width if you're single family next to an industrial use.
what I'm anticipating, and I've always felt this, it's sort of the Achilles heel, and that is if there is a historic property next door to a recent or even 40-year-old community, is that an adjacent use situation that would only require minimum planting?
That's a good question. So if you're within the district, the person within the district would have the minimum planning requirements, but the regular planning requirements would go towards the person who is outside of the district. So each person is still responsible for their own planting requirements, and there would still be a buffer there.
Yeah, okay. I understand what is proposed. Okay. Glenn, Alex, Tammy, would anyone, if there are no other questions, is there an opportunity for a motion to be made?
I do have one other question, David.
All right.
Excuse me. What if in David's example, if we have an established residential subdivision, RM4, RM8, what is the buffer requirement of that particular, those particular properties as compared with the buffer requirement for the new family subdivision that we're talking about?
I understand what you're asking, and I could be wrong, but jump in if I'm incorrect. But regardless, it's still for single family use and single family use, there's no buffer requirements. I believe there's an external buffer for subdivisions, but again, if I'm incorrect, somebody can help me with that one.
I think there is such a buffer, but I can't quote you the regulation.
Terry Lewis, are you on board and can you speak?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, Sharice is correct. There is no buffer between like uses, so single family to single family. However, for major subdivisions, there is a required 20-foot exterior buffer.
Okay, so adjacent use, as used in this proposal, is speaking about two properties of different uses, not residential. Is that what I'm reading? Is that correct?
Well, adjacent use is how we classify two properties that are adjacent to each other. If that use is the same, then there is no buffer requirement. If the use is different, even single family to multifamily, then there is a buffer requirement.
But it says varies between 20 and 30 feet in what I'm looking at. I just want to make sure that we have something that is well thought out. I've just heard that an adjacent use situation in some cases doesn't require any buffer, and yet this says it's going to be 20 to 30 feet.
And in the amendments themselves, we do have the chart that's in the LMO that specifies exactly what that buffer is. It doesn't vary in that case. In the chart that was proposed, that was to just kind of give a little bit of an easier way to look at it versus reading through the actual LMO document.
Okay, so what you're saying is that if coupled with other elements of the LMO, this would be clear.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Tammy?
So staying with that same thought, sometimes as the town official can reduce, right, the buffer setbacks for adjacent properties, if we're asked to do so. That's part of the discretion of the official. So when you're looking at those, there's no necessarily guarantee that what you're reading there will always be the case. And then I add to that my concern, while I realize it's not what we're discussing at the particular moment, but it has been brought up, the concern that if a home occupation, or however we wanted to describe it and define it, if that were to take place, and it's a single family, it's a residential property, it's a residential property, but then, so it's got perhaps no buffer necessarily required for it, and then it becomes a property that does have some sort of something else other than residential living happening on it in a way that's outside of our current expectations with home businesses, which are confined within the home. That adds a dimension and of burden to the adjacent neighbors that I just don't think we have enough information to predict what this particular, what we're doing here today would mean down the road when those elements are further defined and discussed.
I understand what you're saying, and I'm looking at this today as a residential situation, and if we get to the point where other uses are permitted, then I think other aspects of this would be modified to accommodate those different circumstances. So I think that will play out at the point that we're even having that discussion. If there are no other questions or comments at this time, is there a motion to move these forward to Town Council?
Mr. Chairman, I make the motion that we move forward the LMO amendments under the overlay district to incorporate the family compound and family subdivision.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Glenn. If there's no further discussion, Teresa, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Ms. Becker?
No, I don't feel as though we are in a place, there's sufficient information and certainty to move forward. So no.
Mr. Brown?
Support.
Mr. Stanford?
For the motion.
Mr. Ames?
Support.
Motion carries 3-1.
Thank you very much. New business. Review and recommendations on the flood-zone standards LMO amendments. Jerry Mendrick, I hope you're there to make a presentation.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. And if it's okay with you, I would like to take the next two agenda items at the same time because they are related to each other.
Of course. In the simplest terms.
Yes, sir. Give me just a minute to do the screen sharing. There we go. All righty. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and members of the Public Planning Committee. I am Sherry Mendrick, and I'm the Floodplain Administrator for the Town of Hilton Head Island. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the updated FEMA flood insurance rate maps with you today. First, we are going to discuss some basic information about the firms, why and what has changed on the firms. Then we will discuss how the changes to the firms affect both the town's land management ordinance and the municipal code. Finally, we will conclude with proposed changes to both the LMO and the municipal code and changes the town needs to consider to make sure the firm update does not negatively impact the town. So what are firms? FIRM stands for Flood Insurance Rate Map. Firms are maps generated by FEMA that are used for flood insurance rating. It's very, very key to note that these are what is used for flood insurance rating. And these maps are also used as the minimum regulatory standard for building construction. The town's minimum building heights are tied to information provided on the firms, which is a situation that is pretty unique to our community. It is important to note that any changes presented to you today do not dictate flood insurance rates for citizens in our community. The data on the firms set the insurance rates for the buildings. It is more important to note that the town must adopt the flood insurance rate maps before March 23rd of 2021. Our current flood insurance rate maps are dated September 29th, 1986. Currently, the official regulatory maps are in a paper format on several large format plan sheets. In the early 2000s, FEMA began an initiative called MapMod, which is short for Map Modernization, which was a program that they had started to update the outdated paper maps by converting them into a digital format for use in a GIS or Geographic Information System. The next FEMA mapping initiative was termed Risk Map, and that's when FEMA turned around and updated the actual data on the maps. Due to reasons that are unknown to us, the state coordinator's office combined the two mapping initiatives for Beaufort County. When the updated preliminary maps for Beaufort County were finally released in 2017, they were released in a digital format that used a new vertical datum. The vertical datum has been the cause of much confusion, but the important to note is that the new data is approximately less. Also, the new data is overlain on topography maps using light detection and ranging, or LiDAR topography. The updated firms are a much higher resolution than the previous older firms that were on USGS topographic maps. Now, the flood zone determinations are very property specific and vary from lot to lot. As previously stated on the previous slide, there has been much confusion about the vertical datum. Very simply stated, what we've historically known as 14 feet above mean sea level will now be known as 13 feet above mean sea level. The new firms are in NAVD 88 datum. Before we go any further, I have to provide you with the following warnings about the flood insurance rate maps. The firm's survey data was collected before our community was impacted by Hurricanes Matthew and Irma. We lost a large part of our dune system during these storms. The primary dunes slow the storm surge, which does reduce flooding in our community. Without the dunes, the storm surges will potentially be higher. Furthermore, the flood insurance rates were generated without consideration already experienced flooding in our community or local drainage challenges. They also do not account for the current effects of or future conditions related to sea level rise. So what has changed on the flood insurance rate maps? The updated firms show a drastic reduction in the base flood elevations across the town. Historically, base flood elevations have ranged from 11 feet to 14 feet above mean sea level, but the current maps show a drastic reduction in the base flood elevations, with the maximum being around 11 feet. This reduction in the base flood elevations must be scrutinized, as the base flood elevations are used as the rule of measurement for building heights and for the lowest floor requirements in the municipal code for buildings that are constructed in the flood zone. The updated firms also show a drastic decrease in the regulatory area of the town. I must remind you that we live on a barrier island. The maps are currently used to determine if a lowest floor is required as it applies to new construction or a substantially improved structure. Historically, the firms have placed 75% of our land area in a regulatory zone, whereas our updated firms only show 25% of our land area in a regulatory zone. Again, areas within the town with a known history of flooding have been removed from the high-risk zone. This is a snapshot of our current flood insurance rate map. The areas in blue and yellow are the high-risk zones. Flood insurance purchase is federally required in these areas, but once again, these maps are used to determine flood insurance rates. The flood insurance rates are not dictated by the town of Hilton Head Island. These zones are currently regulated by the municipal code with a lowest floor requirement. That's the blue and yellow areas as well. The areas with no color or no shading are the low and moderate risk zones, and these are the areas where flood insurance is not federally required if you have a federally backed mortgage. In 1986, there was 75% of the land area, or on 1986 maps, there was 75% of the land area in the high-risk zone and 25% of the land area in the low-risk zone. Also, please note to the left-hand side of the slide, the base flood elevations in the zone A, which is the high-risk zone, range from 14 to 16 feet. And in the V zone, which are velocity zones, range from 17 to 21 feet. Here is a snapshot of the updated firm. The areas in blue, yellow, and orange are the remaining high-risk zones. The areas with no color are the low and moderate risk zones. As you can see, there is much less land area within the high-risk zone than is the maps that was previously shown. Please note that the base flood elevations on the left-hand side are significantly lower than what we saw in the previous firm. Our A zones range from 7 to 11 feet. Yes, there is a 12 and 13 in that table, but it does not affect any buildable land within the town limits. And then the V zones range from 10 to 14 feet. Once again, the V zones have been drastically reduced, so they've impacted very little buildable property. V zones do have a much more stringent construction requirement. So how do these firms affect the land management ordinance? Well, the LMO currently measures building heights using the base flood elevation as the bottom of the measurement when a property is in the flood zone. If base flood elevations are lower, the maximum building heights will be significantly lower unless we change the way we measure building heights. Also, when constructing a home outside the flood zone, building heights are measured from pre-development grade. For example, let's build a house in the flood zone today that has a base flood elevation of 14 feet and a maximum building height of 35 feet. The current measurement for building height, current measurement for building height is from the base flood elevation or the 14 feet. If you can see where my cursor is on the screen, which means that's the starting point, and then you measure up 25 feet or 35 feet. As you can see, it is actually 7 feet off the ground for a total maximum building height of 42 feet. Now let's build a house right next door to this house after March 23rd of 2021. The new base flood elevation on the lot next door is only 7 feet, which is also equivalent to the ground elevation in this particular diagram. It is very common with the new maps for the base flood elevation to be equivalent to the ground elevation. If we keep the same rule of measurement in the land management ordinance for building heights, the height of the new home will be measured from a lower base flood elevation, resulting in a home that is 7 feet shorter than the home next door. This new scenario also discourages parking underneath the home. There are some zoning districts that do require minimum parking or minimum amount of parking spaces. And the land area in these those zoning districts is pretty tight. More importantly, for the homes that are no longer in the flood zone, the building height will be measured from pre-development grades similar to the new home on the left. This scenario will apply to low-lying areas like Point Comfort and even some beachfront lots. Yes, I did just say that homes on the Atlantic Ocean could potentially be constructed at grade. So how do the updated flood insurance rate maps affect the municipal code? FEMA requires communities to adopt a minimum standard that requires lowest floors to be elevated no more than 1 foot above the base flood elevation. The town's municipal code currently meets the minimum FEMA standard. For example, the typical base flood elevation is 14 feet above mean sea level, and the lowest floor requirement is the BFE, base flood +1, or 15 feet. Due to known and projected effects of sea level rise, there is an increased potential for flooding than what is depicted on the firms. And also with the changes to our dune dynamic from Hurricanes Matthew and Irma, we know that we have increased potentials for storm surge. Also, once again, the areas with repeated flood losses in some beachfront properties have been removed from the high-risk zone. Without changes to our current codes, structures built or rebuilt on these lots will be allowed to be built at lower elevations, even if they have flooded in the past. So as far as the base flood elevation goes, let's again build another house in a flood zone with a base flood elevation of 14. During the 1% annual chance flood, which is commonly known as the 100-year flood, the water is expected to rise to 14 feet above mean sea level, which is the base flood elevation. The lowest floor requirement is the BFE plus 1 foot or 15 feet. It is important to note that currently the maximum building height in the LMO is measured from BFE and not BFE plus 1. So there is already a discrepancy between the two rules of measurement. So once again, let's build another house right next door after March 23rd of 2021. With lower base flood elevations, the minimum lowest floor requirements will also be significantly reduced. For example, the new home is now in a flood zone with a BFE of 7 and will have the lowest floor requirement at only 8 feet above mean sea level. More importantly, for those homes that are no longer in a flood zone, those homes can be constructed at grade. The question is, are the FEMA maps an accurate evaluation of the actual flood risk for our island? I must remind you that the firms are the minimum standard for home elevations. The FEMA survey data was collected before Hurricanes Matthew and Irma. The updated firms were generated without any consideration to those repeated flood loss areas or local drainage issues. They also do not account for current effects or future conditions related to sea level rise. I know I keep repeating that, but it's very important. So there are proposed changes that are required to, or that staff is proposing to both the LMO and to the town's municipal code. Staff is proposing that the rule of measurement for building heights be at a specified height above sea level, so that the rule of measurement is no longer dependent on the data shown on the FEMA flood insurance rate maps. The intent of the specified building height above mean sea level is to keep building heights nearly the same as they are today, without regards to flood zone or pre-development grade. Measuring from a specific height will remove the need to adjust maximum building heights and to disconnect building heights from a fluid regulatory map. The maps do periodically change, usually doesn't take over 30 years. Also, the current building height measurement and the lowest floor requirement are two different elevations, which does cause some confusion. This proposal will marry the two measurements to the same elevation. Finally, the proposed changes will regulate from the same elevation town-wide, which discourages the excessive use of fill and removes potential discrepancies regarding pre-development grade from the building height measurement. The staff recommendation is the use of 13 feet above mean sea level for residential construction and 11 feet above mean sea level for commercial construction as the rule of measurement for building heights. The Planning Commission is recommending for the Public Planning Committee to review the use of 14 feet above mean sea level for residential construction, which adds in the current freeboard requirement. We both agreed to the consideration of the lower requirement for commercial construction for several reasons. The reduction to 11 feet for non-residential properties offers flexibility for redevelopment of a very large inventory of underperforming and vacant commercial property without being overly restrictive. It discourages the excessive use of fill to meet the elevation requirements. Also, typically methods that are used for non-residential construction are less prone to flood damage than those used for residential construction. And what I'm getting there is typical finishes that are used in commercial construction or non-residential construction are more likely to be flood-prone materials than some of the more decorative stuff that's used in residential construction. Furthermore, most of our non-residential structures are not insured through the National Flood Insurance Program, such that their insurance policies are rated on a multitude of different factors with little regard to the elevation of the structure. Staff is proposing the lowest floor, so what are the changes to the municipal code? Staff is proposing the lowest floor be elevated to the same elevation used for the proposed rule of measurement in the LMO. This will also remove the dependency on the FEMA maps for lowest floor requirements. FEMA does require that we have language specifying a specific height above BFE, so it's going to be BFE plus something. In most cases, the proposed lowest floor requirement will be the higher of the two measurements that are proposed. The proposals keep nearly the same footprint as the areas which is currently regulated today, so that it is no longer dependent on the flood zone. Again, the staff proposal will marry the two measurements to the same elevation. These proposed changes take into account the low-lying areas with a history of flooding and those beachfront properties to keep them reasonably safe from flooding. Staff is recommending the use of the base flood elevation plus 13 feet, which is the old 14 feet, above mean sea level, whichever is higher for residential construction, and a BFE of plus 2 feet or 11 feet above mean sea level, whichever is higher for commercial construction. Again, the intent is to keep nearly the same regulatory footprint. As the Planning Commission is requesting that the PPC consider using a higher elevation above mean sea level to be considered as the rule of measurement, Acceptance of that proposal will result in the deviation of 1 foot between the rule of measurement and the lowest floor requirement, which could potentially go back to that confusion, as the rule of measurement will be 1 foot higher than the lowest floor requirement. So just as a comparison of areas, this is the current regulated area from the 1986 map, showing that there's about 75% of our land area that's regulated, about 25 that's not. Just to throw out a value, there's about 5,822 acres that do not have an elevation requirement. This is a snapshot of the special flood hazard area in the 2021 maps. This area shows the regulated footprint dropping to 25% regulated and 75% unregulated. And if we do not change the lowest floor requirements, there will be approximately 15,288 acres that will go unregulated in our community. This is the regulated footprint that is related to the staff's proposal. This results in approximately 7,945 acres of unregulated acres. And based on Planning Commission's proposal, there will be approximately 5,963 unregulated acres of property. There are other proposed changes to the municipal code. The language that is required by FEMA to officially adopt the updated firms has been added. I apologize. I got a little ahead of myself. Some definitions have been changed for consistency with FEMA and for clarifications. Some new definitions were added as a result of new information provided on the maps. We did add a new category for the construction of non-residential auxiliary structures. This is super important. Previously, the town had an exemption for detached restrooms and guardhouses that were required, that we were required to remove that exemption from our ordinance from a community assistance visit back in 2019. Because of the drastic reduction in the base flood elevations, we are able to reintroduce this concept into the ordinance while still meeting the minimum National Flood Insurance Program requirements. These are the only structures that will have regulations that are flood zone specific to meet the minimum standard of the base foot plus 1. But remember that in many cases, the base flood elevation is nearly equivalent to the ground elevation. Staff is also proposing to slightly lower that threshold for substantial improvement. But at the same time, we added more options for the determination of the pre-improvement value of homes or structures in our area. This change has minimal impact on the building community, as most of the builders do not exceed 40% of the home value for improvements because they want to avoid doing additional paperwork that the town requires. It's an itemized list of construction costs, and a lot of contractors do not want to provide that. This change does acquire some additional credit in the community rating system, and just a brief on the CRS. The community rating system is a voluntary program that the town participates in, so that our citizens receive a 25% discount on standard rated flood insurance policies. Other changes to the municipal code include a recent change in the CRS prerequisites resulted in the need to change the language for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing that services the building. We revised the language for the lowest floor requirement for manufactured homes for consistency with the International Residential Code. Also, FEMA recently revised requirements for accessory structures, so they're no longer dependent on a maximum dollar amount. This actually helps us in that the regulations take into account the size of the building and not just a value. FEMA also required that we add new language for regulating the new AO zones, which is an area of shallow flooding. We have very few AO zones that affect an entire piece of property, but the language was modified from the state model to mirror the proposal for the +3 and the 13-foot lowest floor requirements. Also, FEMA required that we add language for an appeals procedure, and this language was taken directly from the state model ordinance. And just for reference, our town attorney has currently done a preliminary review of the ordinance changes and will anticipate completing a full review by the time this is presented to town council next week. So in conclusion, we have to take action now because Town Council must adopt the new flood insurance rate maps by March 23rd of 2021. We do need to consider how the drastic changes to the flood insurance rate maps affect both maximum building heights in the land management ordinance and lowest floor requirements of the municipal code. We do not approve the changes by March 23rd. The maximum building heights and lowest floor requirements will drop by several feet. Homes will be constructed at much lower elevations, which will increase potential for flooding. And at this time, I will be more than happy to answer any questions.
Glenn, would you like to ask a question now, or shall we invite Peter Christian, Todd Theodore, and Brian Esposito to make their comments and then ask questions?
I think I'd like to hear from the Planning Commission folks first.
Okay. Jerry, let's go ahead and invite Peter Christian and Todd Theodore to make their comments. And I'd like to keep these somewhat brief, let's say 5 minutes. And then if there are questions that come out after it, we can deal with those questions. I see Peter and I see Todd, so go ahead.
Todd, you want to take the lead and I'll follow up?
Yeah, some of this is still a little confusing for me. A lot of facets on this, so I don't know how you guys feel. And I think Peter and I might disagree a little bit on this. I'm a little bit concerned about pushing the elevation to 14 from the graphs and this is the first time I saw it, that Sherry had shown that if we go to 14, it looks like we'll actually be increasing the footprint of the regulated area for increased base flood elevation from what's existing to date. And what's confusing to me is the federal government has done all these calculations and they've actually lowered it in some areas and now we're pushing it up. And understand, that we've had a lot of hurricanes and we need to be able to be smart and address, those impacts that we've identified. And I understand from Sherry's perspective that, these maps are important. They've been in the works for, I think, almost 15 years now. It seems like a very long time. And want to make sure that the accessory buildings, the non-habitable structures, that there's some flexibility there because, I don't know, David, you may be aware that, gatehouses and restrooms next to swimming pools, all of that flexibility went away when FEMA required the town to change their regulations, where they used to allow those to be built below flood with hydrostatic vents and those kind of things, so they didn't get into the costly flood proofing and everything. So there's a fair amount of complexity that goes with this flood map change, but I just hate to see imposing stronger requirements when FEMA's actually lowering it in some instances. Now, I'm not saying that FEMA's always going to be right, but it seems like we've kind of maybe have gone in the wrong direction if we go all the way to 14 with that requirement.
Let's let Peter have a shot at this. Peter?
Sure. And I've got a number of comments. And first of all, Sherry has done an outstanding job, and there is a sense of urgency to get something passed. There's no doubt in my mind that sea level is rising. I'm not a weather zealot, but the fact of the matter is, since I've been here, and many of you have been here longer than I have, there are areas that flood that didn't flood before. These maps, as Sherry indicated, were based on pre-Matthew data, and we're going to get a benefit from that to all of our residents because they're going to get lower flood insurance rates. But let's not delude ourselves here. We are in a hurricane zone. Matthew was a high 1, low 2, depending on what weather forecaster you listen to. And I had floods in the highest elevation on the island in Hilton Head Plantation, where it got into homes, and all you need is 6 inches of water, wicks up, and you have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damage. We discussed this very much at the Planning Commission level and felt that we should not be going down. We should at least remain the same. We have an old saying that how much is enough money to have in reserves for a hurricane? And my answer always is there's never enough money, but you have to set a baseline, and that baseline shouldn't be going down. At a minimum, it should be staying the same at the 14+1, and make whatever adjustments you need that it doesn't affect the overall height of a structure. But we all felt very strongly that first floor elevation should not be going down. It should be remaining static where it is now, if not going up. But that's for your consideration.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. Glenn, would you like to ask either one of them a question quickly, and then we'll have Brian as well?
I don't think so. I think I'm ready to make some comments if you want me to, David.
But if Brian Esposito is on, yeah, good, Brian. Go ahead, take 5 minutes.
Yeah, I would also like to thank Sherry for all the hard work she's done at the Home Builders Association. I think we share her concern that the flood rate maps that FEMA put together are maybe optimistic at best. But we would like to support the staff's recommendation of going to the 13-foot sea level, mean sea level proposal rather than the 14-foot. While 14-foot is currently what we're required to build at, from 1986 until 2016, for 30 years, homes were required to be built at that 14-foot, which is now going to be 13-foot. I think it's not in the town's best interest to require 30 years of building stock that's built up at the old 14-foot, now new 13-foot sea level, and have to adhere to the 50% or what will now be the 49% substantial completion, substantial renovation. That's a ton of work for the builders, the community development department, and it also adds a ton of cost and discourages renovations to those homes. I would challenge your statement that homes built at the 14-foot or 13-foot had extensive flooding damages. There was some flooding in Hilton Head Plantation for Matthew, but that wasn't. That was more to do with improper drainage and some defects and pumps failing. But for the most part, the damages done to homes built at the 14-foot were due to trees falling and not due to flood. And we really support the staff's recommendation and to make sure that we keep that 30 years worth of building stock not having to apply to the 50% rule, because I think that's especially when you're exceeding what FEMA's regulations are by multiple feet.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it, and thank you, Todd and Peter. And Teresa, let's bring it back just to the Public Planning Committee. Thank you very much. All right, Glenn.
Thank you. First, let me say that as I see it at this point, we have no choice but to move this matter forward to the full council for adoption before the deadline date. The deadline date would result in major harm to our community. Then I would say, as everyone else has said, thank you to Sherry. I posed questions to her. She gave me answers. And I want to go through a general discussion of my understanding of these issues And Sherry, I would appreciate it as I'm going through my statements, if you say, wait, that's not right, please make it clear. So, as I understand it, the land on this island ranges from a high point of about 24 feet, which I think is probably pretty near where I am in Hilton Head Plantation, down to 0 feet at the south end of the island. We all know that we're subject to hurricane risk. We're subject to flooding. We have the federal government coming in here telling us what we have to do. We won't get into the politics of that, but we do have to do it. So, as I understand it, we have had the 14-foot regulation for a number of years. This regulation relates to the height above sea level. It does not relate to the height above the ground. And so that, adopting that, has given a lot of homes a lot of protection in a lot of storms that have come and gone. That 14 feet, as I understand it, is above sea level to what's called the base flood elevation, BFE, which is the bottom of the bottom floor. You have an allowance for an additional foot for the construction of the flooring on which people would live in the first floor of their homes. So we have the maps that were adopted in 1986, apparently based upon estimated elevations, approximate elevations, and we got along okay with those. Then science has evolved, and we now have much more scientifically approved maps or scientifically accurate maps. So the result is that a lot of the island that was covered in a flood zone, if you will, from the 1986 maps is no longer covered in that flood zone as defined by the federal government.
Glenn, I'm going to ask you to bring it to a conclusion, please.
Okay. It's a complicated subject, and I was trying to make sure I said it right. But anyway, we've learned over time that, in fact, even though we have high ground in Hilton Head Plantation, that ground can flood for various reasons. And we know that the lower ground on the island can flood. And so what's come forward from staff with Sherry's leadership is a proposal that we go from a 14-foot base flood elevation to a 13-foot base elevation. So I pose the question, why is that? And the answer is that over time, as a matter of fact, sea level has risen approximately 1 foot in this area. If you accept that as a fact, and I think we have to for these purposes, then having that base flood elevation at 13 feet as recommended by the home builders, as recommended, I think, by the Planning Commission, and certainly recommended by the staff, we would maintain the same height elevation of the base floor of residential properties on this island. It seems to me that commercial development, it's not as strict. It gets down to a policy argument, for the council to decide how we want to affect that, and I don't think we have to do that right now. It sounds to me like creative minds can come up with ways to deal with this auxiliary structures issue. And so I, for one, now that I've been educated and I've gotten rid of some of the scientific terms and tried to speak about it in English, I think I understand this, and I think the recommendations that are being made are the correct way for this town to move forward. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Glenn. Tammy?
So I too, I think, had a great discussion with Sherry and appreciate her expertise and knowledge on all of this. Without your guidance, as lost as we are right now, we'd be really lost. So understanding and accepting that March 23rd is a critical date with regard to adopting the new FEMA insurance rate maps, that certainly is a priority, and we need to attend to that. My questions were asked. I sent back a summary. I didn't get any response that I had gotten anything incorrect. So I'm assuming that I did, that I was okay with my understandings. That was shared with the rest of you. A later question came up, though, that I'm still concerned about. As we look at these changes to the LMO, it's my understanding from listening to conversation that there's a small section, around 100 homes, thereabouts, in Palmetto Dunes that would be required after this adoption to seek a variance from the town in order to have the same building rights as the rest of the island. So that's one question I want to have clarification on, because for me, just like in other areas, I don't think it's right to have a singular small population that has to seek out variances or changes or any type of difficulties when looking to do the same exact thing that someone down the street perhaps could do, or in another neighborhood.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I learned quickly, I just want to add, because it's part of the same conversation, and then I learned late yesterday that it's not just that section in Palmetto Dunes, that in fact there are lots, as we've discussed, there are lots adjacent to each other that could have different height requirements, but that there are actual lots in addition to the Palmetto Dunes in Bradley Circle that would also have that same difficulty down the road. And I wonder about those, but I also wonder if there are other areas on the island that also might have that same problem. So how frequent of a problem is it? Where are those locations at? And what is it that we can do to alleviate the problem for those people who would find themselves having to apply for a variance, spend the money, the time, the aggravation, all of the rest, and be unsure whether or not the variance would be granted. So I just need answers to those questions.
Sure. And I apologize for not responding yesterday. I was working on the numbers for you to look at those specific areas to make sure I got it right today. Mm-hmm. So one thing to keep in mind about Palmetto Dunes is that Palmetto Dunes is a PD1. So Palmetto Dunes has, in itself, by right, has a 75-foot maximum building height. So maximum building heights in Palmetto Dunes are regulated really by the ARB, and when we're looking at the residential stuff, the town really doesn't get involved. But the scenario that you're talking about is there's a small area of the island, Palmetto Dunes, part of Burke's Beach and Bradley Circle, I have exact values for you, that do have a base flood elevation of 11 feet. What that means is the way we have to write in that +3, base flood elevation +3 or 13 feet, whichever is higher. In those areas, that's this area with the base flood elevation of 11 feet, they would actually have, if you accept town staff's proposal, would actually have the requirement to be at the new 14 feet. This would result in a deviation with the building height. So what would happen is that right now we're trying to marry the building height with the lowest floor, and that the lowest floor requirement will need to be 1 foot higher than the building height. So in Palmetto Dunes, there's exactly 114 lots that are in this base flood elevation of 11. 9 of those are vacant lots right now. But we really don't regulate the maximum building heights for residential in the in that area. So those are kind of come out of the system for us. Now, the important lots that we had looked at for a hardship that are outside of Palmetto Dunes are both at Burks Beach and Bradley. 5 lots in that area that have a base flood elevation of 11 feet. 27 of those lots are vacant lots. So there will be that 1 foot deviation where the lowest floor will need to be higher. And if staff's proposal is accepted, when those lots are built or the 75 lots are rebuilt, and if they want to build 1 foot higher, they will need to apply for a variance. However, that is not going to make the building height go any higher than it is today. So they will actually they will lose a foot of building height, and staff tries to work with people to get them within their range before we even try to go for a variance. But even if we did grant a variance, it would not result in any building that is higher than what is currently allowed today. With the Planning Commission proposal, it would, if the variance were applied, it would require the increase of 1 foot. So it is just that one small area where that is that deviation, well, they will lose a foot of building height. And if they could meet the variance criteria, it is a variance that could possibly go towards or to the Board of Zoning Appeals for review and a potential approval.
Right. So I get that, and I like the idea of 1 foot lower. I think we ought to take advantage, quite frankly, as I've expressed, the FEMA lowering the requirement and see if we could help solve our concerns over height on structures in this fashion, at least partially. But having said that, there's also the question of equity, and I think it would be basically would be unfair to put a small section of the town in a position where they would be having to go for a variance when the lot next door maybe wouldn't have to be. Is it a possibility that we could, would it be BFE +2 instead of +3 that would solve that problem, and everyone would be on the same footing then?
Yes, for residential construction, yes.
That was going to be my the way I would approach this. It makes everyone fair in this, and I think that's the only right thing to do with regard to that. There were a number of other questions. I think the conversation's unfortunate that we don't have more time, because I really would like to see that statistical analysis. I think Judd had a very good point as to what are the flood height analysis over the last few years with the Hurricane Matthew and Irma. What is the reality that we saw in those two examples, recent examples, and how would that all interplay? I think all of that data would have been very interesting and informative as to how many feet above BFE or how we approach this. But I certainly at this point, just based on equity, think that BFE +2 is a better way to go. So I'll pass this on to other people to speak.
All right, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Cherie, thank you for your time and your due diligence in this matter. I am willing and prepared to move forward with the staff recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alex. Brief and to the point. I appreciate that. Sherry, a few questions just for clarification. You mentioned something about the velocity zone being up to 21 feet. Was that a BFE of 21, or what's that 21 represent?
Currently, they are on the 1986 maps. There are some areas that are on the bluff of Hilton Head Plantation and Port Royal, along Port Royal Sound, that are considered to be in that velocity zone. And yes, they can have a base flood elevation up to 20 and 21 feet. It's been a problem for this area since 1986.
But you say up to, are they required to go higher?
Yes, the International Residential Code and subsequently Town Ordinance does require them to be at the base flood +1 currently, but those areas are being mapped out of that velocity zone.
Okay,
So,
you've answered my question.
okay.
I asked the question because of what we were just talking about in Palmetto Dunes and Bradley Circle, Burke's Beach. So anybody can, if they choose to, can build higher. Why does somebody have to get a variance to build higher in Palmetto Dunes or Burke's Beach and Bradley Circle?
Well, they don't have to get a variance to build higher. There's maximum building heights per zoning district in the land management ordinance. So if they wanted to build higher, they might lose some of their building height, but
So
it's only 1 foot that they would be.
So we're talking about a requirement to have a foot higher for the BFE, and we're worried about the top of the building a foot. Is that what we're talking about? A variance to get the top of the foot a foot higher? I mean, I don't understand the problem really. If we're talking.
I didn't hear the question.
We've lost you.
I have to. Yes, hold on. I think I'm going to have to call in.
But you see my point. The variance isn't on the ground. The variance is 74 feet up. So I just don't think this is a material issue.
And I apologize. I didn't hear all of the question. I have some network issues right this second. But that would not apply to anything in Palmetto Dunes because Palmetto Dunes ARB regulates their building heights.
Okay.
So in those Burke's Beach area, what it would do is currently the rule of measurement is 1 foot below what the lowest floor requirement is. For those 27 vacant lots or 75 lot totals, it switches. So the lowest floor requirement is here, but the maximum building height, the lowest floor requirement is here, but the maximum building height measurement starts here.
Yes, I understand.
So if they needed to go up that additional foot, then that's when they would need to apply for a variance. And I apologize, I did not hear the whole question.
Okay, but again, the matter of a foot at 75 feet is an issue that developer can deal with. I don't think it is a point that we should distort all the rest of the island for that particular circumstance. If we were dealing with an issue at the ground, I would feel different. But the matter of being up 74 or 75 feet, if I were designing that structure, I could easily make the adjustments to 74 feet and not have to deal with that.
But the 75 feet is the resort development area. This area isn't that. The Bradley Circle, Burke's Beach is 35 feet. And while that may not seem all that much different, my point, and correct me because you brought up a question about it. So my concern is just making sure that we don't have a pocket on the island, regardless of where it is, whether it's Palmetto Dunes or whether it's the Burke's Beach, Bradley Circle area, or if it's somewhere else on the island, that there's just a pocket of people that if they want to do the exact same thing as someone else does, because of this ordinance, are forced through the variance process. And that's all. I just think that that's something that, whether it can be adjusted, et cetera, is one thing. But if it requires an extra step through another way, I just think that we're heading in the wrong direction of fairness.
Okay, I would ask the question of Terry Lewis. She doesn't have to respond at this time. Is there such a thing as a blanket variance under those types of circumstance? But I think I would like to make just one statement. I think we're talking about two issues when we talk about BFE. One is storm surge, and that makes a lot of sense to get up as high as possible when a wave overwashes our dune system. But in other parts of the island where your natural grade is 7 feet and you're at 14, you basically have 7 feet of freeboard, and it would have to be a catastrophic flood to fill up those 7 feet. Whereas in Hilton Head Plantation and some other areas of the island, your natural grade might be 14 feet, and then it becomes a individual developer owner's decision to put in 1 foot of fill or 3 feet of fill in order to get that freeboard adequately. So I'm prepared to move this forward. And Sherry, I think you've done an outstanding job in trying to simplify an incredibly complicated and confusing issue for me and my feeble brain. So if there is a motion to accept the staff's proposals both on the municipal code and on the firms, I would welcome it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that the Public Planning Committee move forward the proposed amendments to the LMO and the proposed amendments to the municipal code dealing with flood control, building heights, etc., as discussed and as outlined in the staff report and the draft amendments.
Thank you, Glenn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Alex.
So I just want to ask, and I don't know what the proper procedure is, that my concern and consideration for adopting 1 foot lower has been to solve the problem of those few residents on the island who would get caught in caught up in this and require variance, that be considered as it moves forward. I don't know if it's a change to this or whether it's just a note on it so that we have some further discussion between now and when it goes to town council.
Thank you, Tammy. I think Terry Lewis can shed some light on that. I appreciate that. Teresa, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Ms. Becker?
Yes, with the comments I just made, please. Thank you.
Mr. Brown?
Support.
Mr. Stanford?
For the motion.
Mr. Ames?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. And now we can move on to the Palmetto Breeze discussion. Is Mary Lou still on board?
I am.
Okay. Welcome. How have you been?
Oh, thank you. We've been doing really well over here.
Good. Good. You have a proposal? Or?
I got somebody working on this video because this is not my forte.
Mr. Ames, this is Ann Siren, Senior Planner. While Mary Lou is adjusting her video, do you mind if I give you a bit of information before she starts?
Of course. Did I overlook something?
Oh, no, no, sir. I just wanted to mention that I looked at the numbers, and despite the challenges related to COVID last year, I think the trolley service actually did quite well. In absolute numbers, the numbers are much less than they were in 2019. But that was partially due to the extremely limited service days that happened last year. I just want to note that in 2019, we had 197 service days with an average of 91 riders per day. This past year, we only had 61 service days, but we still had an average of 72 riders per day. So we were at about 80% riders per day over 2019, which I think is a pretty good rate. And I just wanted to note that for you in addition to the information in your memo. And I'll hand it over to Mary Lou.
Okay, thank you.
And Ann, I had also made note of that as well. We struggled a lot with the COVID, as everyone did. We continued to run our commuter buses, but we did not run the trolleys as Hilton Head was pretty shut down for the start of the year. And so we did transport, as Ann said, she did it by the day. We did 11,287 passengers last year. We did 18,000 the year before. So again, we only had about a half of a service a year actually with the COVID and shutting down early. So I'll move forward with the first item, which is we think that this is the year to go ahead and add the third trolley to service the Follyfield Road area and all of the businesses there, the Hilton Head Resort, the Hilton Head Beach and Tennis, the Island Club, the Barony, the Westin, and all of the villas. We think that this will help the mission of reducing car traffic on the south end of the island, as a lot of people that come and stay will enjoy the convenience of the trolley coming right by their place of abode and going to the different businesses, Shelter Cove and onto Park Plaza and down into Coligny. And we feel like we can generate a lot of ridership in there and think that this is the time to go ahead and move forward with it. As I was looking at the amount of money it costs to run and the grant funding we have and all of the things that make this up, we fell short probably by about $50,000. And so then I started looking at the service. Well, what do we do as transit people when perhaps it's a little higher than what you want? And you look at what you're offering. And so I know that our ridership doesn't really take off until the Heritage. So that's why I proposed starting the service on April 10th. That's the Saturday as the Heritage is starting, because that is really when our ridership kicks up. And again, after Labor Day, we were really busy Labor Day weekend, and then that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it's not so many people. We've kind of gone into our lull season, and then maybe the next weekend we might have a good weekend of ridership. But that seemed to me a good way to reduce the cost of the service. And so by doing that, and actually trimming an hour a day off of the routes. And I looked at the ridership at that time of night, and very few people actually take the bus at 10 p.m. on Sunday through Thursday or at midnight on Friday, Saturday. Our schedules say that we end at that time, but we went ahead and did the extra trip in case someone thought they could catch it at that time. So we did that starting out just to really try to provide the service to everybody. So the actual trimming of the service to enable us to put the third bus route out, I don't think will have any real significant impact on the offering of the trolley service. And so that's why I'm recommending that as a way to move forward with the third trolley, the second route.
Okay.
You want me to just go ahead on to the next item?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. Last year, or maybe the year before, last year was a blur. We had talked about installing monitors in the trolleys, and I believe this committee asked us to look into it, and it seems like it would be a really good addition to the trolleys. So we've begun to look at getting them installed. We found one person that does boat installations that could do something that's more ruggedized than what you would do in an office or a home, and so we want to go forward with that. The content that we want on there, we really want to promote Hilton Head with this and promote a lot of what you can do while you're riding the trolley along the trolley route, and then any festival and celebration, which is about one every weekend. We would like to get that in a 30-minute loop. The trips are about 30 minutes, and so someone could get on and they would be able to see what's happening on Hilton Head, what they could do based on the trolley, and then what festivals are coming. So we think that's a really good item, but of course wanted to bring it back to the committee. And then the last item with the fare-free service, we were all very hopeful over here by removing the barrier of the fare and people not knowing if they had to pay. And, it is a barrier for people that we could really attract a lot more riders. I do feel like we did fairly well considering the COVID last year. So I do believe removing the fares and making it fare free, I would anticipate that we would go from that 18,000 passenger ridership in 2019 to over 30,000 riders. I believe that would be a huge benefit in reducing the car traffic and just making a better experience for the folks that are visiting and that live on Hilton Head. And the last thing I wanted to say is paid parking does increase transit ridership. In every study I've ever read, I just wanted to say we're definitely supportive of whatever will get folks to look at the bus as an alternative to driving.
Thank you very much, Mary Lou. I appreciate that. We have 3 items before us. Tammy, do you want to hit them?
I'm going to pass for right now and let someone else pick that up.
Okay. Alex.
Yes, Mary Lou, thank you for the presentation, and thank you for your efforts along the years, particularly as it pertains to what is happening on island. As I can appreciate you, cutting your degree of services to fit the budget, I would encourage you to instead ask us for more money and let us fight about that. And the reason that I'm saying that is because I have always modeled this trolley concept against what happens in Sea Pines, okay? And the trolley system in Sea Pines has become a part of the brand in that community, okay? And you will find not only visitors riding the trolley, but those that work in areas in Sea Pines that are very limited when it comes to parking spaces, okay? To a degree where even some of the major employers have started to implement their own trolley service to a degree to transport employees. So, I would encourage us to really speak to 2 of our new comprehensive plan core values. One would be economy and the other infrastructure. And I think that those are very germane to this conversation, because if we can increase ridership, not just of our visitors, but also of our working staff, I think we'll be in a better place as far as limiting the amount of cars on our highways. So, I guess my big idea here that I'd love for you to chew on is at some point, that route touch as many places on Hilton Head as possible, okay? Because I think that's the direction that we need to go in. We're going to continue to see more and more traffic on our island because of the growth off island. And if we're not looking at a comprehensive transportation system and using the Palmetto Breeze trolley, I think is a good starting point and moving that forward, we're not going to be able to keep up. So again, I applaud your efforts thus far. We got a ways to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Glenn?
Thank you. First of all, I appreciate the clarification from you and Ann about the number of riders. I think I have made some comments about poor ridership in 2020, and I think they were out of line. So I apologize for any confusion that may have been caused by that. I think the idea of extending this 3rd route over into the Folly Field area is a very good thing. I think it can ease a little bit some of the traffic on the roads and certainly parking situations that are going on around. But I would observe that those are people who are either living here or people who are renting here, staying here for a vacation versus day trippers who would be using the system as it exists now, or at least that's what I think. Then I have 2 comments. One is looking at that new route. I'm assuming that we're not talking about a stop at Islanders Beach Park, and I would be opposed to a stop at Islanders Beach Park. That being said, I'm not naive enough to think that someone getting on or getting off at Barony or getting off at Island Club might not just walk down the road and go into the beach park. But that being said, that's my opinion. And then I have said this a number of times before, and that is I have been on the trolleys. I like the trolleys a lot, except they don't have a place for beachgoers to put their stuff. And I would urge you to take out some seats and to put in some racks or something in there so that people can put their beach gear, or as we call it, beach stuff, on the trolley and ride to wherever they want to go to the beach. I'm very pleased to see the growth of this service. I see Alex's dream as being something that is realistic for the future of this island. So I look forward to continuing to work with Palmetto Breeze in a partnership basis to improve that transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Tammy, do you have comments now?
No, I do. You threw me with the 3 points. I wasn't sure I was prepared, but after reviewing it, I see what you're talking about. So first of all, thank you for joining us today. It's I think unfair in many respects to look at the last several years of statistics on ridership and how it's gone to include last summer, because it does skew things. I'm glad to hear that the numbers are higher than maybe we would have expected. But having said that, if you look at the big picture of those statistics, while there may be some increases here and there, we don't seem to be generating the type of interest that that is really reassuring that our dollars are being well spent. And while I understand that this program, if successful, our contribution financially is money well spent. But I'm a fiscal conservative, and I like to make sure that every dollar counts. So right now, I don't feel really confident in that. Will it increase? Will it count more with a third trolley extending into a different area? Are those the type of neighborhoods that will produce the type of ridership that's more than just getting to a beach? I doubt it, since those areas have very good access, nearby access to the beaches. So that's what I have to say about that. I'm reluctant, I'm hesitant to continue to spend money without seeing the value back from having done so. In terms of the monitors, I think if we were to continue, those monitors become, I think, an important part of the writing experience as it describes our island, our history, our sea turtles, and all of those features that you suggested. The one thing I would not be in favor, that I think has been brought up in the past, but would not be in favor of any paid ads, but more of a welcome to Hilton Head. Here's what we're all about. We value you. Please value and respect us. That type of framing. And so I think I've added the most important points at this time that I wanted to be sure were heard.
Thank you. Mary Lou, I'm sure because we've had these conversations now for 3.5 years, you know exactly what I'm going to say. I'm interested in how we measure success and how we make sure that what we're doing enhances our brand. Having said that, I'm in favor of extending the route to Folly Field. I would challenge staff and you to figure out a way to more in greater detail measure success, not just number of riders per day, but when are the riders riding and where are they going and so on. I think that just because of the way our island has developed, we don't have many places that distribute a concentration of workers at one place. So as Alex was suggesting, in order to be successful, you have to stop a lot of different places. And I want to understand how that plays out as we move forward. Videos, tremendous opportunity for brand enhancement. I've talked to Jen McEwen. The town has videos already. I think it'd be great if we can get tax money going to some of our nonprofits like Mitchellville, Coastal Discovery Museum, where we begin building a library of videos for those riders. I think that's a no-brainer, but you didn't say how much that's going to cost. Is that something that's built into your budget?
Yes, I'm not asking for any money. We actually, the way our grants work, the grants cover 80% of the capital of things we purchase, and so it doesn't really cost our partners that help with the local share a lot of additional money. But at this time, we have money in our capital accounts that we can use for this. When I preliminarily looked at the prices year before last, it was about $1,000 for the monitor and the install. Now we haven't refreshed that price. We've been back to see the vendor, but he's had a lot of work to do. So I'm going to actually take a trolley over there next week.
Okay.
And,
is it realistic to say if we have a thumbs up on that that's something that can be installed by April 10th?
That's the goal.
Okay.
That's the goal.
All right.
And Brian, who is my marketing person, is working with your town staff to develop the content. So, and I would like to say the staff, Ann Siren and Jennifer Ray and Carolyn, have all really made our lives so much better in helping us to understand, the criteria for the town and the quality of service, and they've really helped us to be successful.
One of our core values is excellence, so we want to spread that in every direction we can. The last is the fare-free issue. We talked about that last year. I think actually we dropped it last year, didn't we? And I'm in favor of that. At this point, we have to do everything possible to make these buses exciting, fun, and a preferred choice rather than getting in a car and driving somewhere. So I'm in favor of all three of those. I like Glenn's suggestion of taking out some seats. I'm thinking of the little jitneys or trolleys, shuttles that you get into at a airport, where there are a bunch of seats, but there are these big racks where you stick your suitcases and so on. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have racks, but I do think that Glenn is suggesting something that very well may begin to play into how people move to the beach. So I'd like you to look into that and see what you think. Go ahead if you want to.
I was going to say something I could say just right off the bat is that those front seats don't face forward. They face into the aisle. And the reason for that is those seats flip up. And they flip up so if somebody is in a wheelchair, they can be tied down there. And there's tie downs and a way to strap things down. And no driver's ever told anyone they can't bring things on the trolley. And I know that every night when they come back, they sweep a ton of sand out of them. So I haven't had a problem yet that somebody, called and said, hey, I tried to bring my cooler on and they wouldn't let me. So they're letting people bring whatever they have at this point.
Well, I see a lot of people walking down Arrow Road now with little trolleys behind them. I mean, walking all the way from there to get to the beach. Now, if the trolley ran by them, I think they'd jump on it. So I just think there's an opportunity there. The other thing that I've noticed, Pope Avenue, all the way actually down pretty much to Palmetto Bay, is sort of our main transportation corridor, if you will. It has the highest concentration of people all the way along and commercial businesses. We have a group of timeshare golf carts that run back and forth, picking up people and trying to sell timeshares. I think that's the wrong image for Hilton Head. And, you know, my vision is that we have electric carts that aren't golf carts, but are a little bit more than that, running up and down Pope Avenue and Palmetto Bay. And that becomes a part of the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So my challenge to Palmetto Breeze, is there an opportunity that you can expand your business plan to think about something like that on Hilton Head? Because yes, the buses serve a purpose, but I'm not sure they serve the purpose of up and down Pope Avenue, our spine. So that's just an idea like Glenn's.
I like challenges.
Good, good. All right. Are there any other questions on these three matters, or can we move forward with a motion to support?
Mr. Chairman, this
Yes.
is Teresa. If I may, we have a member of the public on the call that would like to give comments on this item.
Oh, of course.
Miss Jones, are you still with us?
Am.
Ms. Jones, thank you very much for your patience.
Oh, of course. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and the committee. I thank you for this opportunity to speak to this group. I am Dow Jones. I'm here to represent, I saw that laughter, I am Dow Jones. I am here representing the Hilton Head Island Beach and Tennis Resort on behalf of Miss Kate Kluel, who is our executive director, and our 846 owners and countless guests that visit our resort annually. We are located mid-island at 40 Follyfield Road. Our group was present in person last year when the topic and proposal to add Follyfield Road to the trolley route was presented. We presented to the committee a 5 letters and memos of support for the addition, and were pleased when the proposal was forwarded for further consideration. We were hopeful that the proposal would pass the next wicket for approval and that we would see the addition of the route in 2020. Well, we all know what happened in 2020. COVID, and the proposal was tabled. We are happy and excited that this item appeared back on your agenda, and we are hopeful this committee will see fit to advance this measure to add Follyfield Road to the trolley route. We are therefore back again today to voice our continued support for this addition, as it is, in our opinion, in the best interest of everyone. It is a logical addition because, as you know, the Palmetto Breeze always goes down Follyfield Road, and our advancement of our tourist offerings is unsurmountable. Probably, I know that this trolley will help with the traffic problems that I have listened this afternoon to you all express about parking and the going-ons down at Caligny. We all experience that traffic problem through the summer months. We think it is in the best interest of Hilton Head and us all to expand that trolley route. It is a win-win. We respectfully ask that this committee advance this measure on by voting yes for this addition. Again, I thank you for your attention and this opportunity to be heard. We will be watching and waiting for your decision. Thank you all so very much.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, is there a motion to advance these? It's really, we were here to give our feedback, but I think if we are in agreement that these are good things, I think we should push them forward. Teresa, were these recommendations actually going to go to the full council at the next meeting? or not?
Sir, I can address that. It's Ann Siren again. This was something that was a committee, public planning committee decision. And so we were looking for guidance from you.
Okay. Well, is there a motion to give a positive response to all three of these ideas?
I'll make the motion, David, to support the ideas, the three ideas that are presented here. And
thank you.
Second.
Second? Okay. Teresa, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Ms. Becker?
yes.
Mr. Brown?
Support.
Mr. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Ames?
Yes.
Motion
Thank you.
carries unanimously.
Thank you very much, Mary Lou. Look forward to the progress this year. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Before we adjourn, this has been a long meeting in a couple of cases. I think I was short in my comments. I apologize. I try to move things along, and perhaps that got more attention than it should have in this case, so I apologize. If there is no other business, we will adjourn at this time. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Fine meeting, Mr. Chair. Thank you. You did good.
See you.